The coffee cup shook in Dr. Lisa Warren's hands as she read the translation on her computer screen. She had been working the night shift at Kepler Research Station, floating quietly in orbit around Jupiter. Most of the crew was asleep. The station was peaceful, just the way Lisa liked it when she was trying to decode alien signals. But this signal was different. This one made her blood run cold. She read the words again, hoping she had made a mistake. The computer had picked up the transmission 3 hours ago and had been working to translate it ever since. Now the results were clear, and they were terrible. To any who can hear this message, we are the Villani people of the Arcturus system. Our world is burning. The enemy has come to destroy us. We're the last of our kind. If there's anyone out there who still fights against the darkness, please help us.
Peace.
We have children who will die if no one comes. Lisa's hands were shaking so hard she had to put the coffee cup down. She had spent 5 years studying alien languages, but she had never seen anything like this. The message was being broadcast on every frequency the station could detect. Someone out there was screaming for help across the entire galaxy. She ran to the communications room and woke up Sergeant Pete Davis, the night communications officer. Pete was a big man with kind eyes who had served in the Earth Defense Force before coming to work on the research station. "Pete, you need to see this." "Right now," Lisa said, her voice tight with worry. Pete looked at the translation, and his face went pale. "How long ago did this signal reach us?" "The computer says it took 4 years to get here from the Arcturus system," Lisa replied. "That means whatever happened to these people, it happened 4 years ago. They might all be dead by now." Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for the emergency communication button. "We need to wake up Commander Morrison. He needs to know about this." Commander Jake Morrison had been sleeping deeply when the alert came through his personal communicator. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes who had been running space missions for 20 years. When he read the message, he felt something. Cold settle in his stomach. Morrison called an emergency meeting in the station's main conference room. Within an hour, his senior staff had gathered around the metal table. Dr. Warren sat next to Chief Engineer Bob Parker, a quiet man who could fix anything that broke on the station. Across from them sat Captain Ray Collins, Morrison's second in command, and Lieutenant Amy Carter, their best sensor operator. "Tell me what you know about this signal," Morrison said to Lisa. Lisa pulled up the translation on the wall screen. "The language is unlike anything I've seen before. It's very musical with lots of complex sounds the computer had to work for. 3 hours just to figure out the basic grammar. But the message is clear. These people, the Villani, are asking for help." "Where is this Arcturus system?" asked Captain Collins. Lieutenant Carter brought up a star map. "It's about 40 light years from Earth. That's a 3-week journey if we push our fastest ships hard." Chief Parker shook his head. "Commander, with respect, this signal is 4 years old. Whatever was happening to these people, it's probably over by now." Morrison stared at the message on the screen. He had read the files about humanity's expansion into space. Earth had been building colonies on worlds that other alien species said were too dangerous to live on. Humans seemed to thrive in places where everything wanted to kill them. The alien communities in this part of the galaxy called humans Deathworlders, because they came from a planet so violent that they could survive almost anywhere. "What do we know about this enemy they mention?" Morrison asked. Lisa pulled up another screen. "They call them the Scourge. From what I can understand from the signal, they seem to be some kind of force that destroys worlds. The Villani describe them as darkness that consumes everything." Sir Captain Collins said carefully, "Earth's first contact rules say we should report this back to headquarters and wait for orders. We're just a research station. We don't have the weapons or ships to fight an unknown enemy." Morrison looked around the table at his people. These were good. Men and women who had volunteered to spend years in deep space, far from their families, studying the galaxy around them. They had not signed up to be soldiers, but Morrison had been in space long enough to know something important about humans. When someone called for help, they answered. It did not matter how far away the call came from. It did not matter how dangerous it might be. Humans had a hard time ignoring people in trouble. "How many ships do we have available?" Morrison asked. Captain Collins checked his tablet. "The heavy cruiser Titan's Reach is docked for maintenance. We have 4 destroyers, 6 frigates, and the medical ship Mercy. All of them could be ready to leave in 48 hours.
Chief.
Parker looked worried. Commander, that's only 12 ships. You don't even know what we would be fighting. Morrison stood up and walked to the window that looked out at Jupiter's Great Red Storm. The giant planet had been spinning for billions of years, its massive storms larger than entire worlds. Humans had learned to build stations that could survive in this violent environment. They had learned to make homes in places that would kill. Most other forms of life? I've been thinking about something, Morrison said. Every human colony world has been built on planets that the galactic community said were impossible to live on. Every human ship is built like a fortress because we expect trouble everywhere we go. Other species think we're crazy for living. The way we do. He turned back to face his staff. Maybe that's exactly what these Villani people need right now. Maybe they need someone crazy enough to travel 40 light years to answer a 4-year-old distress call. Dr. Warren looked up from her tablet. Commander, I've been studying the linguistic patterns in their message. The Villani language is beautiful. Their culture seems to value art, music, and peaceful things. They sound like gentle people who never expected to face something like this scourge, which means they probably don't know how to fight back, Morrison said. Lieutenant Carter pulled up more data on her screen. Sir, if we're really going to do this, I should mention that the Arcturus system is right on the edge of explored space. We would be completely on our own out there. No backup, no reinforcements, no way to call for help if things go wrong. Morrison looked at each person around the table. He could see fear in their eyes, but he could also see something else. He could see the same thing that had driven humans to explore dangerous worlds and build homes in impossible places. He could see the stubborn refusal to give up that had carried humanity to the stars. I'm not going to order anyone to come with me, Morrison said. This is volunteer only. Anyone who wants to stay here and report back to Earth can do that. I'm going to the Arcturus system. Someone called for help, and I'm going to answer. Captain Collins was the first to speak. I'm with you, sir. Me too, said Lieutenant Carter. One by one, every person in the room volunteered. Chief Parker was the last to speak, and he did it with a sigh. Well, someone's going to have to keep those ships running. Might as well be me. Morrison felt something warm grow in his chest. This was why humanity had survived everything their violent world had thrown at them. This was why they had reached the stars. When someone was in trouble, humans came running. All right then, Morrison said. Prep all ships for immediate departure. We leave in 36 hours. As his staff filed out to begin preparations, Morrison stayed behind to look at the Villani message one more time. Somewhere out there, 40 light years away, people were depending on them. People who had sent a desperate call into the darkness, hoping someone would hear. The Deathworlders had heard, and they were coming. The journey to the Arcturus system took 3 weeks. During that time, Dr. Lisa Warren spent every waking hour studying the Villani language and culture. She worked in a small room on the Titan's Reach, surrounded by computer screens showing alien text and sound patterns. The more she learned about the Villani, the more her heart broke for them. Their language was full of words for beautiful things like music, art, and the careful growing of plants. They had poetry that talked about tending gardens and watching sunsets over peaceful lakes. These were not a people who knew how to fight wars. They call their worlds garden planets, Lisa told Commander Morrison during one of their daily meetings. From what I can understand, they spend most of their time making their homes more beautiful. They grow special trees that sing in the wind and flowers that change colors with the seasons. Morrison looked tired. He had been pushing the fleet hard to reach Arcturus as quickly as possible. What about their technology? Do they have weapons? Ships that can fight? Lisa shook her head. Their technology seems focused on peaceful things. They have machines that can make plants grow faster and tools that can paint pictures in the sky using colored lights. But I haven't found any mention of weapons or warships. Captain Ray Collins was monitoring their approach to the Arcturus system from the bridge. The sensors were starting to pick up signals from the area ahead of them. What they were seeing made his stomach feel sick. Commander Collins called over the ship's communication system. You need to come to the bridge right now. Morrison arrived, to find his entire bridge crew staring at their screens in horror. The sensor displays showed the Arcturus system spread out before them, but it looked nothing like what they had expected. "What am I looking at?" Morrison asked. Lieutenant Amy Carter pointed to her screen. 3 of the planets in this system show signs of recent bombing, heavy bombing. It's the kind that destroys everything on the surface. She switched to another view. Those debris fields used to be space stations, maybe homes for people who lived in orbit around the planets. Now they're just floating junk, cold and dead. Morrison felt his heart sink. They were too late. The Scourge had already destroyed the Villani civilization, but then Carter pointed to another screen. "Sir, look at this. The 4th planet, the one the computer says, is called Velanos Prime. Something is very wrong there." The planet on the screen was glowing with a red light that looked angry and unnatural. The oceans that should have been blue were steaming and bubbling. The continents were covered in dark smoke. "The surface temperature has gone up by 40 degrees, reported Chief Engineer Bob Parker from his station. "The oceans are boiling. Whatever hit that planet, it's still happening." Morrison stared at the dying world on the screen. Life signs. Carter worked at her controls for several minutes. "I'm picking up something from the smallest moon orbiting Velanos Prime. It's faint, but it looks like maybe 10,000 life forms. They're deep underground and heavily shielded." "The survivors," Morrison whispered. That was when they saw the Scourge ships. The enemy vessels were unlike anything in the human databases. They were huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They looked almost alive, like giant sea creatures. Swimming through space, their hulls seemed to pulse and move as if they were breathing. "I count over 200 enemy ships in the inner system," Collins reported. "They're swarming around the planets like insects, stripping away everything they can find." Morrison watched the tactical display showing the locations of all the Scourge vessels. The enemy ships moved in groups, working together like animals in a pack. They were systematically destroying everything in the system, taking apart the planets, piece by piece. Sir Collins said quietly, "We should go back to Earth, get reinforcements, a real fleet that can handle this many enemy ships." Morrison counted the human ships on his own tactical display. 12 vessels against more than 200? The math was simple and terrifying. But then he looked at the life signs data from the Villani moon. 10,000 people, hiding underground, waiting for help that might never come. How long could they survive down there? How long before their air ran out or their food was gone? "By the time we get back to Earth and organize a fleet, those people will be dead," Morrison said. "Sir, with respect, we might all be dead if we..." "Try to fight those numbers," Collins replied. Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had followed him across 40 light-years of space because someone had called for help. They had left the safety of their research station and traveled to the edge of known space because it was the right thing to do. "Patch me through to all ships," Morrison ordered. The communication officer nodded. "You're on, sir." Morrison took a deep breath. "This is Commander Morrison to all vessels. I know what you're all seeing on your screens. Ados. I know the numbers don't look good. We came here to answer a distress call, and what we found is worse than we expected." He paused, looking out at the red glow of the dying planet ahead of them. "But there are still people alive down there. 10,000 Villani civilians who called out into the darkness 4 years ago, hoping someone would hear them, someone would care enough to come help them." Morrison's voice grew stronger. "Every one of us volunteered for this mission. We knew it would be dangerous. We knew we might not come home. But we came anyway, because that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind." He looked at the tactical display one more time. "I'm not going to lie to you. The odds are terrible. We're outnumbered 20 to 1. The enemy ships are bigger than ours. But we have something they don't have." Collins looked at him with a question in his eyes. "We're humans," Morrison said simply. "We come from a world where everything wants to kill us. We've learned to survive in places that would destroy most other forms of life. We know how to fight. When the odds are impossible," Morrison opened the communication channel again. "All ships, this is your commander. We didn't come this far to turn around and go home. We came here to save lives. Those Villani people have been waiting for years for someone to answer their call. Today, they get their answer." The responses came back immediately from all 12 ships. Every captain, every crew member, ready to fight. Morrison looked at Collins. "What's our status?" "All ships report ready for combat," Collins replied. "Weapons charged, shields up." "Any word from the Villani survivors?" Carter checked her communications equipment. "I'm picking up a weak signal from the moon." "They know her." "Here, they're asking if we're really human ships." Morrison smiled for the first time since they had arrived in the system. "Tell them yes. Tell them the cavalry has arrived." The Scourge ships had noticed the human fleet now. The alien vessels were changing course, moving away from the planets and toward the newcomers. Their formation looked like a massive wave of death rolling across space. Sir Collins said, "They're coming right at us." Morrison nodded. "Good. That means they're not attacking the moon. All ships prepare for combat. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to buy time and save lives." The first Scourge ship opened fire, and the battle for the Arcturus system began. The first thing the Scourge learned about humans was that they did not fight the way other species fought. Most alien races in the galaxy fought battles in straight lines. They formed up their ships in neat formations and attacked head-on, trying to overpower their enemies with superior numbers or bigger weapons. It was organized and predictable. Humans did not fight that way, Commander. Morrison split his small fleet into 3 groups before the Scourge ships could reach them. He sent Commander Kate Phillips and her 6 frigates racing toward the outer edge of the system, where they began hitting Scourge ships that were far from the main group. "Captain?" Collins took his 4 destroyers deep into the asteroid belt that circled the system. The rocky debris provided perfect cover for surprise attacks. His ships would appear from behind a large asteroid, fire everything they had at a Scourge vessel, then disappear back into the rocks before the enemy could respond. Morrison himself took the heavy cruiser Titan's Reach and the medical ship Mercy straight toward the Villani moon. He was broadcasting on every frequency he could find. "This is the Human Expeditionary Force, calling Villani survivors. We received your signal. We are here to help you." The response came back in broken, heavily accented English. The Villani had been listening to human radio transmissions for years, trying to learn their language. "Humans, you really came, but we are so far from your space, so far from anyone." "Distance does not matter," Morrison replied as his ship shook from enemy weapons fire. "Nobody fights alone while humans are still breathing." The voice from the moon sounded like it was crying. "We thought we were forgotten. We thought everyone in the galaxy had abandoned us." "Never," Morrison said firmly. "We heard you calling, and we came." The battle around the moon was fierce. Scourge ships swarmed toward the Titan's Reach like angry wasps. Their weapons fired streams of energy that could cut through metal like it was paper. But the human ship had been built to survive in dangerous places, and its armor held. Lieutenant Dan Murphy was the weapons officer on Captain Collins' destroyer Phoenix Dawn. He had been studying the Scourge ships during the fighting. He's looking for weak spots. All enemy ships had weak spots if you knew where to look. Captain Murphy called out as they hid behind another asteroid. "I think I found something. Look at this." Collins moved to Murphy's station and looked at the sensor readings. "I seeing the Scourge ships have these organic holes, right? But look here, where their weapons connect to the main body. There's a small area where the living hull meets the weapon systems. The connection is weak." Collins understood immediately. "If we hit them there, their weapons should shut down." "Maybe permanently," Murphy said with a grin. Collins opened a communication channel to all human ships. "This is Phoenix Dawn to all vessels. We have targeting data for Scourge weak points. Sending coordinates now." The information spread through the human fleet in seconds. Suddenly, every human weapon was aimed at the same vulnerable spots on the enemy ships. The effect was immediate and devastating. Scourge vessels that had been firing continuously suddenly went silent. Their weapons shut down, and their ships began to drift. Some of them started breaking apart as their organic hulls failed without the support systems. "All units, this is Morrison." The commander's voice came over the radio. "Excellent work. Press the attack." Commander Phillips and her frigates were having their own success on the outer edge of the system. The small, fast human ships were perfect for hit-and-run attacks. They would race in, destroy a Scourge vessel, then speed away before the enemy could organize a response. "This is defiant to all frigates," came the voice of Captain Helen Brooks. "I'm seeing something interesting here. These Scourge ships seem to follow orders from larger command vessels. Take out the big ones, and the smaller ships get confused." Phillips checked her tactical display and saw what Brooks meant. The Scourge. Ships moved in groups around larger vessels that seemed to be giving them orders. It was like a hive mind, with queen ships controlling the workers. "All frigates target the large vessels first," Phillips ordered. "Let's cut off their heads." The human ships concentrated their fire on the Scourge command vessels. It was dangerous work because the command ships were heavily protected by smaller escort vessels. But the humans had learned to be patient. They would wait for the right moment and strike with everything they had. When the first Scourge command vessel exploded, something remarkable happened. The 20 smaller ships that had been following it suddenly stopped moving in formation. They began flying in random directions, no longer working together. "It works," Phillips reported to Morrison. "Take out their command ships and the rest fall apart." But the Scourge were learning too. The enemy began to change their tactics, spreading their command vessels further apart and protecting them with more escort ships. The fighting became harder and more dangerous. Back at the Vallani moon, Morrison was dealing with his own problems. 3 large Scourge vessels had broken through his defensive line and were heading straight for the underground shelters where the survivors were hiding. "Amy, can you get me a communication channel to the Vallani?" Morrison asked Lieutenant Carter. "Yes, sir. You're connected. This is Morrison to Vallani survivors. We have enemy ships heading your way. How strong are your underground defenses?" The reply came back quickly, filled with fear. "Our shelters were built to protect against natural disasters, not enemy weapons. If those ships attack us directly, we cannot survive." Morrison looked at his tactical display. The Titan's reach was already damaged from the fighting. "We're running low on ammunition. The shields were failing. But those 3 Scourge ships could not be allowed to reach the moon. Collins, this is Morrison. I need your destroyers here now." "On our way, sir," came the reply. 2 minutes. Morrison knew they did not have 2 minutes. The Scourge ships would reach the moon in 90 seconds. "All power to engines," Morrison ordered his crew. "We're going to ram them." Chief Engineer Bob Parker's voice came over the ship's communication system. "Sir, if we hit those ships at full speed, it will destroy us too." "Then we better make sure we take them with us," Morrison replied. The Titan's reach turned toward the 3 approaching Scourge vessels and accelerated to maximum speed. The human ship was smaller than any of the enemy vessels, but it was built like a battering ram. Everything about human ship design was focused on surviving impacts and continuing to fight. Morrison opened a channel to his entire crew. "This is your commander. We came here to save lives. If we have to give our own lives to do that, then that's what we do. That's what it means to be human." But just as the Titan's reach was about to impact the first Scourge ship, Collins and his destroyers arrived. The 4 human warships opened fire with everything they had, concentrating their attack on the weak points Murphy had discovered. All 3 Scourge vessels exploded at the same time. Morrison pulled his ship out of its attack run and looked at the tactical display. The immediate threat to the moon was gone, but the battle was far from over.
Ow.
There were still over 100 Scourge ships in the system, and more were arriving every hour. "Sir," Carter reported, "I'm getting a priority message from the Vallani survivors. Put it through." "Commander Morrison, this is Engineer Nala of the Vallani people. We have been monitoring your battle. Your tactics are unlike anything we have. Ever seen you fight like the stories our children tell about heroes from the old times?" Morrison smiled despite the danger around them. "We're just doing our job." "No," the Vallani engineer replied. "You are doing much more than that. You are showing the galaxy what it means to answer a call for help." The Scourge response to their losses was swift and terrible. 3 massive ships appeared at the edge of the system, each one the size of a small city. They were different from the other Scourge vessels, darker and more menacing. These were not worker ships or even command ships. These were dreadnoughts built for one purpose only: to destroy everything in their path. "Captain Collins, watched the new arrivals on his sensor screen as his destroyer limped back toward the Vellani moon. His ship had taken heavy damage in the asteroid belt fighting. Half his weapons were offline and his hull was venting atmosphere into space. "Sir, we need to retreat," Collins said over the communication channel to Morrison. "Those new ships will tear us apart. We've done everything we can here." But Morrison was listening to reports from Dr. Lisa Warren on the medical ship Mercy. She had been working with the Vellani survivors, trying to understand their situation. What she told him made his blood run cold. "Commander, the underground shelters are failing," Warren reported. "The Scourge bombardment damaged the moon's heat systems. Poisonous gases are leaking into the refugee areas. The Vellani have maybe 6 hours before their life support systems collapse completely." Morrison stared at his tactical display. 3 Scourge dreadnoughts were moving slowly but steadily toward the inner system. Behind them came dozens of smaller ships, a reinforcement fleet that would overwhelm the remaining human vessels. "How many Vellani are down there?" Morrison asked. 10,000, Warren replied. "Men, women, children, the entire surviving population of their species." Morrison made his decision. "All ships hold position around the moon. We're not going anywhere," Sir Collins protested. "If we stay here, those dreadnoughts will destroy us. If we leave, 10,000 people will die," Morrison replied firmly. Dr. Warren had been working frantically with Vellani engineers to find a solution to their failing life support systems. The Vellani were a peaceful people, but they were also brilliant scientists. Their technology was advanced in ways that humans had never imagined. "Commander, I think I have a plan," Warren said over the communication system. "But it's going to sound crazy. I'm listening." The Vellani developed something called a planetary cooling field. It can rapidly cool down the surface of a world and stabilize atmospheric systems. They were going to use it to repair their damaged planets after the Scourge attacks. Morrison waited for her to continue. "The problem is, it requires massive amounts of energy. More power than their failing systems can provide. But if we connected our ship reactors directly to their equipment, we could power the cooling field and save their underground shelters." Collins understood the problem immediately. "That means we can't move while the field is active. We'll be sitting targets." "Exactly," Warren said. "We'd have to park all our ships around the moon and transfer most of our power to the Vellani systems. We couldn't maneuver, we couldn't retreat. We'd be completely defenseless against those dreadnoughts." Morrison looked at the tactical display again. The Scourge dreadnoughts were still 2 hours away, but when they arrived, they would find the human fleet unable to move or fight back effectively. "How long would we need to maintain the cooling field?" Morrison asked. "At least 3 hours to stabilize the life support systems," Warren replied. "That's 1 hour longer than we have before those dreadnoughts get here," Collins pointed out. Morrison opened a communication channel to all ships. "This is Morrison to all vessels. Dr. Warren has found a way to save the Vellani survivors, but it requires us to give up our ability to maneuver. We'll be sitting ducks when those big enemy ships arrive." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not going to order anyone to stay. Any ship that wants to retreat to a safe distance can do so now. No one will think less of you." The responses came back immediately from all 12 ships. Every captain, every crew member, volunteering to stay and defend the Vellani moon. Captain Helen Brooks, commanding the frigate Defiant, was the first to speak. "Sir, we didn't come this far to run away now," Commander Phillips added. "Besides, we're humans. Impossible situations are what we do best." Morrison felt pride swell in his chest. These people were the best of humanity, willing to sacrifice everything to save strangers they had never met. "All right then," Morrison said. "All ships, take defensive positions around the moon. Prepare to transfer power to Vellani systems. We're going to make our stand here." The human ships formed a sphere around the small moon, with the heavy cruiser Titan's Reach at the center. Thick power cables were run from each ship to connection points on the moon's surface. The Vellani had worked frantically to modify their cooling systems to accept human power sources. "Power transfer beginning now," reported Chief Engineer Bob Parker. "All ships are feeding energy to the cooling field." The effect was immediate. Deep underground, the Vellani shelters began to stabilize. Poisonous gases were filtered out. Emergency life support systems came back online. Temperature and pressure returned to safe levels. "It's working," came the excited voice of Villani engineer Nala. "The cooling field is working. Our people are safe." But on the tactical display, the three scourged dreadnoughts continued their approach. They were still an hour away, but they were bringing with them enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Morrison used the time to study his enemy. The dreadnoughts were not just large, they were smart. They had learned from the earlier battles and were approaching carefully, with dozens of escort ships protecting them from human hit-and-run attacks. "Sir," Lieutenant Amy Carter reported from her sensor station, "I'm detecting some kind of new weapon on those big ships. It's unlike anything we've seen before." "What kind of weapon?" "I think it's designed to crack planets open," Carter said with worry in her voice. "If they use that on the moon while we're connected to it..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. If the Scourge cracked the moon open, it would destroy both the Villani survivors and the human fleet at the same time. "Captain." Brooks had been studying the approaching enemy formation from her position on the defensive perimeter. Her frigate Defiant was the smallest ship in the human fleet, but it was also the fastest. "Commander, I have an idea," Brooks said over the communication channel. "Those dreadnoughts are big and powerful, but they're also slow. What if we could take out their main weapon before they get close enough to use it?" "How?" Morrison asked. "Ramming attack. My ship is fast enough to get through their escorts. If I can hit their primary weapon system before they fire..." Morrison understood what she was suggesting. It would be a suicide mission. The Defiant would be destroyed, and everyone on board would die. "Helen, I can't ask you to do that," Morrison said. "You're not asking, sir. I'm volunteering." We all knew this might be a one-way trip when we left Earth. Brooks had already begun accelerating her ship away from the defensive formation. Besides, somebody has to keep those big ships busy. While the cooling field finishes its work, the Defiant raced across space toward the approaching Scourge fleet. It was a tiny ship compared to the massive dreadnoughts, like a sparrow attacking eagles. But it was fast, and its human crew knew exactly where to hit their target. Brooks managed to get through the escort ships by using every trick the human fleet had learned. She dodged and weaved through enemy fire, using the confusion of battle to mask her approach. When she finally reached the lead dreadnought, she aimed her ship directly at the massive weapon that could crack planets. The Defiant hit at full speed, and both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that lit up the entire system. Helen Morrison whispered, watching the explosion fade on his screen. But her sacrifice had worked. The lead dreadnought was crippled, its planet-cracking weapon destroyed. The other two dreadnoughts slowed their approach, suddenly cautious. "Sir," Carter reported, "the cooling field is almost complete. Just 30 more minutes." As Morrison looked at his remaining ships, they had lost the Defiant, and several other vessels were badly damaged. But they were still holding the line around the Villani moon. "All ships hold position," Morrison ordered. "We're almost there." The cooling field worked perfectly. Deep underground on the Villani moon, 10,000 survivors breathed clean air for the first time in months. The poisonous gases were gone. The emergency systems were stable. The children were safe. But above them, the human fleet was dying. The Titan's Reach had lost main power to everything except life support and the cooling field connection. Half her weapons were destroyed, shields were down to 8%. Commander Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the two remaining Scourge dreadnoughts approach with their escort fleets. "Sir," reported Chief Petty Officer Ron Blake from Damage Control, "we have hull breaches on 7 different decks. The ship's structure is failing. One more direct hit, and we're finished." Morrison nodded grimly. They had done what they came to do. The Villani would survive. That was enough. Captain Collins and his remaining destroyers were in even worse shape. The Phoenix Dawn was running on emergency power only. Her weapons were out of ammunition. Her crew was working desperately to keep the ship from breaking apart. "All ships, this is Morrison," the commander said over the communication system. "You have all served with honor. When people ask what happened here, they'll know that humans answered the call. They'll know we didn't abandon anyone." The medical ship Mercy was the only vessel still in decent condition, but she had no weapons. to speak of. Dr. Lisa Warren stood in her laboratory, listening to the sounds of the ship's hull groaning under enemy fire. She had been translating communications from the Villani survivors throughout the battle. Commander Warren said over the radio, "The Villani want to say something to you. Put them through." The voice that came over the communication system was young and clear, belonged to a Villani child whose family had been saved by the human sacrifice. "Human Commander Morrison, my name is Kira. I am 7 years old by your counting. My mother says I should tell you what we did." Morrison was confused. "What you did? You came to save us?" "We sent out a new message. We told everyone in the galaxy about the brave Deathworlders who heard our call and came to fight the darkness. We told them how you crossed 40 light years just to help people you had never met." The child's voice grew stronger. "We sent your story to every world, every ship, every station we could reach. We told them that if the humans could be this brave, maybe they could be brave too." Morrison felt something cold in his stomach. "Kira, you shouldn't have done that. We're too far from help. No one can reach us in time." "Hey, Commander," the child said with excitement in her voice. "They already have." That was when Lieutenant Amy Carter shouted from her sensor station. "Sir, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Lots of ships." Morrison turned to look at Carter's screen and felt his heart stop. The sensor display showed 47 vessels appearing at the edge of the Arcturus system. But these were not just human ships. The computer was identifying vessels from dozens of different species. "This is Admiral Susan Chang of the Earth Defense Ship Liberator," came a strong voice over the communication system. "Sorry we're late to the party, Morrison. Traffic was heavy on the way here." Morrison stared at the tactical display in amazement. "Admiral Chang, how did you know we were here?" "The Villani broadcast your story across half the galaxy," Chang replied. "When word got out that humans had traveled 40 light years to answer a distress call, well, it reminded a lot of people what we're supposed to be fighting for." The reinforcement fleet was like nothing Morrison had ever seen. There were sleek ships from the Altarian Republic, massive battlecruisers from the Centauri Federation, and even the mysterious black vessels of the isolationist Draconian Empire. "How many ships?" Morrison asked Carter. 47, sir, representing 12 different species. It's the largest combined fleet in galactic history. Admiral Chang's voice came over the radio again. "It's all human vessels. This is Chang. Stand down and let us handle this. You've done enough." But Morrison was not ready to step back. "Admiral, with respect, we started this fight. We'd like to finish it." Chang laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." "All vessels, this is Admiral Chang. Primary targets are the 2 remaining dreadnoughts. Show these scourge creatures what happens when the galaxy stands together." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Scourge had ever faced. Instead of fighting one species with predictable tactics, they suddenly found themselves up against 12 different military traditions, each with their own weapons and strategies. The Altarian ships moved like dancers, weaving between enemy vessels and striking with precision laser weapons. The Centauri battlecruisers fought like ancient warriors, charging straight at their enemies with massive kinetic weapons. The Draconian ships seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts, hitting the Scourge from directions they never expected. And through it all, the human vessels continued to fight with the stubborn determination that had brought them to Arcturus in the first place. The 2 Scourge dreadnoughts, faced with overwhelming opposition from a united galaxy, tried to retreat. Toward the edge of the system, there was no escape. The combined fleet surrounded them and methodically destroyed every Scourge vessel in the system. When the last enemy ship exploded, the entire galaxy seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Morrison found himself in the medical bay of the Mercy 3. Days later, recovering from radiation poisoning, Dr. Warren sat beside his bed, working on her translation equipment. She had been busy translating thank you messages that were arriving from all over the galaxy. "What are they saying?" Morrison asked. Warren smiled. "Thank you," in 47 different languages. The Villani story about the Deathworlders who answered their call has spread to thousands of worlds. Everyone wants to say thank you. Morrison closed his eyes. His body hurt from the radiation exposure, but his heart felt light. "We just did our job, Lisa," Someone was in trouble, so we helped. Oh, Jake, Warren said, using his first name for the first time. You did much more than that. You reminded the entire galaxy what it means to be alive in this universe. What it means to care about people you've never met. Through the medical bay's small window, Morrison could see the rescue fleet at work. Ships from dozens of worlds were evacuating the Villani survivors to new homes throughout human space. The alien refugees would be safe, scattered across many worlds so that their species could never be completely destroyed again. Commander Kate Phillips visited him that afternoon. Her frigate squadron had suffered heavy damage, but all her people had survived. The Villani Council wants to give us some kind of medal, Phillips told him. They're calling it the Order of the Distant Star. It's for people who travel impossible distances to help others. Morrison laughed, which made his chest hurt. A medal for doing the right thing. Apparently so. They also want to name their new colony world after you. That's not necessary. Try telling them that. They say that when their children ask how their people survived, they want to be able to point to a star and say that's where the help came from. Dr. Warren looked up from her work. Jake, there's something else. The Galactic community is forming a new organization. They're calling it the Emergency Response Alliance. Anytime someone sends out a distress call, member species commit to sending help, no matter how far away it is. Morrison felt something warm grow in his chest. Because of what we did here? Because of what you proved was possible? Warren corrected. You showed that distance doesn't matter when people need help. You showed that good people will always answer the call. Outside the medical bay window, the rescue work continued. The last of the Villani survivors were being taken to their new homes, escorted by ships from a dozen different worlds. They would rebuild their civilization. But they would never forget the desperate signal they had sent into the darkness 4 years ago, and they would never forget that. When that signal reached the Deathworlders came through. Morrison closed his eyes and smiled. Someone had called for help across 40 light-years of empty space. Humans had heard that call and answered it. In the end, that was all that mattered. The galaxy was a little brighter because people still believed in helping each other. As long as humans drew breath, no one would have to face the darkness alone.